Ryan's office revenge. You want to know what the nerve center of a regional airline looks like at 4 a.m.? It's not the polished terminal with the shiny jets parked outside like sleeping giants. It's a windowless bunker that smells like burnt coffee and desperation, filled with humming servers and monitors displaying 1,000 moving pieces that somehow need to work together so people don't die. That's where you'd find me, Hank Patterson, 54 years old, staring at screens that most people couldn't read if their lives depended on it. Thing is, their lives actually do depend on it. For 16 years, I've been the Senior Operations Director at Atlantic Regional Airways. That's fancy talk for the guy who makes sure 200 flights a day don't turn into smoking holes in the ground. I'm the one who built the computerized dispatch system from scratch back when everyone else was still using clipboards and prayer. Navy trained me well. When something's mission critical, you don't leave it to chance. See, most people think planes fly on jet fuel. They don't. They fly on the obsessive attention to detail of guys like me who spent their youth crawling around F-14 Tomcats on carrier decks, learning that small mistakes make big explosions. 20 years in the Navy teaches you that complex systems need human expertise, not just fancy computers. The system we use, I call it dispatch, sounds high-tech, right? In reality, it's a carefully built network of code I've been crafting and patching for over a decade. Every piece of legacy hardware, every outdated protocol, every weird quirk of our aging fleet, I know where the problems hide because I've solved most of them myself. Tuesday morning started like every Tuesday for the past 16 years. I walked into the Operations Control Center, grabbed my usual spot at the master console, and started my ritual. Check the overnight reports, review weather patterns, make sure the crew scheduling hadn't fallen apart while I was asleep. "Morning, sunshine," grunted Danny. Rodriguez, my shift supervisor. Danny's got 20 years under his belt and looks like a guy who's seen every possible way an airline operation can go sideways. He was unwrapping what looked like a gas station breakfast burrito. "Don't start with me, Danny," I said, logging into the system. The familiar green glow of the monitors lit up my workspace like a cockpit at night. "How's the East Coast looking?" "Messy. Storm system moving up from the Carolinas. Boston's already showing delays, and we've got a crew timeout situation in Charlotte." I cracked my knuckles and got to work. This is what 16 years of experience looks like. I had the weather pattern analyzed in 30 seconds, alternative routes mapped out in my head, and backup crew assignments ready before most people could find Charlotte on a map. Within 10 minutes, I had rerouted 4 flights around the storm, juggled crew assignments to cover the delays, and manually overridden a scheduling conflict that would have left 150 passengers stranded. The warning lights blinked off one by one, green across the board. This is what I live for, taking chaos and turning it into order, taking Murphy's Law and telling Murphy to go find another airline to mess with. Every green light on my board represents families getting to their destinations safely, business deals happening on time, kids making it to college orientation. That's the weight of this job. But you know what they say about feeling like you've got everything under control? That's usually when someone walks through your door carrying a Harvard MBA and zero understanding about how anything actually works. At 9:15 a.m., the door to the OCC swung open. Preston Walsh walked in wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck payment, followed by a woman in a business outfit that screamed consultant from 50 feet away. The air pressure in the room seemed to change, like when a storm front moves in. Preston is the owner's son, 29 years old with perfect teeth and the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to fix your own mistakes. He spent the last 3 years at some management consulting firm in Manhattan, which apparently qualifies him to revolutionize airline operations. Word around the hangar was that Daddy wanted him to learn the business before taking over. The woman was Stephanie Torres, and she carried herself like someone who'd just discovered the secret to everything. She had that consulting firm polish, expensive glasses, tablet computer welded to her hand, and a vocabulary full of words like synergy and optimization. Everything about her screamed, "I'm here to fix your broken company." "Hank!" Preston boomed, like we were old drinking buddies instead of two guys who'd maybe exchanged 10 words in 3 years. Just the guy we wanted to see. My stomach dropped. In 16 years, the only time management came down to the OCC was when something was broken or someone was getting fired. The operations control center was like the engine room. Executives only visited when the ship was sinking. "Preston?" I said, not getting up from my console. A 737 was requesting priority routing around the storm system, and that took precedence over whatever management theater was about to unfold. "What brings you to the operational trenches?" "We're here to observe," Stephanie chimed in, her voice crisp and professional. She held her tablet like it contained the answers to everything. "Gerald thinks it's time we really understood the core systems. You know, identify optimization opportunities." Optimization. That's consultant speak for we're going to fire people and replace them with software that doesn't actually work. Right now I'm handling a 737 around a thunderstorm over Atlanta, I said, typing commands into the routing system. "You're welcome to observe, just don't touch anything." Preston wandered over to my bank of monitors, studying the displays like he was looking at hieroglyphics. The screens showed flight paths, weather radar, crew, assignments, and fuel calculations, all updating in real time. To me, it was a symphony. To him, it probably looked like chaos. "This interface looks pretty vintage," he said, running his finger along the edge of one monitor. "When was this system last updated?" "Every day," I said. "I update it every day. Has been running without a major failure for 8 years, 3 months, and 12 days. "But the underlying architecture," Stephanie said, consulting her tablet like it was a holy book. "This is all legacy code, isn't it? Built on outdated frameworks?" I looked at her. She had that particular kind of ignorance that comes with just enough knowledge to be dangerous, like someone who's read about flying but never been in a cockpit. "It's built on frameworks that work," I said. "Every piece of this system has been tested under fire. It doesn't fail because I don't let it fail. That's exactly the kind of single point of failure risk we're talking about," Preston said, his voice taking on that MBA lecture tone. "What happens when you retire? What happens if you get hit by a bus?" The room got quiet. Danny looked up from his workstation. Even the constant hum of the servers seemed to pause. "You don't talk about buses in an operations center. We deal with enough real disasters without joking about them." "Are you asking me about succession planning?" I said slowly. "Or are you telling me I'm about to get hit by a bus?" Preston's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. The same look I'd seen on young officers who thought they knew better than the chief petty officers. "We'll talk more about this later. Conference room, 2 p.m. They left, trailing expensive cologne and the scent of corporate restructuring. The door clicked shut behind them, and the familiar sounds of the OCC resumed. Keyboards clicking, radio chatter, the gentle whir of cooling fans. Danny walked over to my station after they were gone. That felt ominous. "Yeah," I said, turning back to my screen so the Atlanta situation was resolving. The storm was moving east, and I had 3 alternate routes ready if needed. "Better update your resume, Danny." I knew what was coming. I'd seen this play before, in the Navy and in civilian life. Young executive comes back from business school, decides the old guard is holding the company back, brings in consultants to validate what he already wants to do. It's a tale as old as bureaucracy itself. The thing is, Preston didn't understand what he was looking at when he stared at my screens. He saw an old system that needed updating. I saw 16 years of hard-won knowledge embedded in every line of code. Every custom protocol I'd written was a lesson learned from a crisis that could have gone very, very wrong. Like the fuel calculation override I'd built after a contractor almost sent a 737 to Denver without enough gas to clear the Rockies. Or the crew timeout algorithm that accounts for union rules, FAA regulations, and the fact that Captain Martinez always takes 10 extra minutes for his pre-flight because he's thorough, not slow. You can't buy that knowledge. You can't download it. You earn it by being the guy who gets called at 2 a.m. when something goes sideways. At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into the conference room. The space was all glass and chrome, overlooking the hangar where mechanics in coveralls were keeping our planes airworthy with actual skill and knowledge, the kind you can't get from a PowerPoint presentation. Preston sat at the head of the table like he was chairing a board meeting instead of planning to gut the department that kept his father's airline running. Stephanie was to his right, tablet ready for action. Gerald Walsh Sr., the company founder, wasn't there. That was a bad sign. When the old man doesn't show up for the execution, you know the fix is in. "Hank, thanks for joining us," Preston said. He gestured to the empty chair across from him, like he was doing me a favor. "We've been analyzing the operational metrics, and we think there's room for significant improvement." Significant improvement. Translation: we think we can do your job with an app. Stephanie stood up and dimmed the lights. A PowerPoint appeared on the wall screen. The first slide said Digital Transformation Initiative in bold blue letters that probably took someone 3 hours to perfect. "The current operations model is too reactive," she began, clicking to her next slide. "Too dependent on individual knowledge and manual intervention. We want to move to a predictive, AI-driven approach." I leaned back in my chair. The leather squeaked like it was protesting what was about to happen. "And what does that look like in practice?" "Automated scheduling optimization," she said, clicking through slides full of charts and graphs that looked impressive, but meant nothing. "Machine learning algorithms that can predict delays before they happen. Integrated dashboards that give us real-time visibility into every aspect of operations. We already have that," I said. "It's called experience and a functioning dispatch system. But it's not scalable," Preston jumped in, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Everything runs through you. You're a bottleneck. 16 years of keeping their planes in the air, their passengers safe, their company profitable, and I'm a bottleneck, like a clogged drain that just needs to be cleared out." "Preston," I said, keeping my voice level the way the Navy taught me when dealing with officers who didn't know port from starboard, "do you know why Flight 447 diverted to Richmond last Tuesday instead of continuing to Norfolk?" He blinked, looked at his notes. "System generated an optimal routing solution based on current conditions." "Wrong," I said. "Flight 447 diverted because I know that the ILS approach to Norfolk gets sketchy when there's crosswinds over 15 knots, and the automated system doesn't account for that quirk in a 20-year-old aircraft. I diverted that plane because I've been doing this since before you could tie your shoes." Preston's face reddened. Stephanie made notes on her tablet like she was documenting evidence of my insubordination. "That's exactly the kind of know-how we want to capture in the new system," she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone consultants use when they're explaining why your expertise doesn't matter. "You can't capture it," I said. "You can't code intuition. You can't program 16 years of watching storms and aircraft and crews and knowing when something's about to go wrong before the computers even see it coming." "We think we can," Preston said, leaning forward in his chair. "And we think it's time for Atlantic Regional to move into the 21st century." The room got quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning. I looked around the table at the faces of middle management, people with mortgages and kids in college who were calculating how long their severance would last if this whole thing went south. "So what's the timeline on this digital transformation?" I asked. "We're implementing the new system over the next 60 days, Stephanie said, consulting her tablet. "We'll need you to transfer all your protocols and procedures to the new platform. Complete knowledge transfer." "And then?" Preston cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the glass-walled room. "We're offering you a very generous early retirement package, full pension benefits, healthcare continuation, and a substantial severance. You've earned it, Hank. Time to enjoy your golden years. Golden years. At 54. Because I was too old to learn new tricks, apparently. Too set in my ways to embrace the future of airline operations management." I stood up. The leather chair squeaked one last protest. "I need to think about this." "Of course," Preston said, but his smile was getting thinner. "Take all the time you need. But we're moving forward with or without you. With or without me. 16 years of building something that worked, and they figured they could just swap me out like a faulty circuit board." I walked back to the OCC and sat down at my console. The afternoon shift was picking up, flights pushing back from gates, crews checking in, weather updates flowing across the screens. My system was humming along like a Swiss watch, handling hundreds of moving pieces without breaking a sweat. Danny came over, unwrapping what looked like a convenience store sandwich. "How'd it go?" "They want to automate me out of existence," I said, pulling up the crew scheduling display. Flight 892 to Chicago was showing a potential pilot timeout. I started working on alternatives, replace everything with AI and algorithms. Can they do that? I looked at the screens, at the thousands of lines of code I'd written over the years, at the custom patches and workarounds that kept everything flowing smoothly. Each one was a story. A crisis averted, a lesson learned, a piece of institutional knowledge that existed nowhere except in my head and my personal code. Library. "They can try," I said. That's when I made my decision. If they wanted to see what their operation looked like without me, I'd give them exactly that. You see, over the years, I'd built something that wasn't in any manual or documentation. Every critical system had what I called Hank hooks, custom protocols that automatically called my personal subroutines when things got complicated. These weren't official features documented in the system architecture. They were my personal toolkit for keeping the planes in the air. The crew scheduling algorithm hits a conflict? It calls my override function that accounts for 37 different variables. The weather routing system can't find a clear path? It uses my storm avoidance protocols that factor in aircraft performance, pilot experience, and passenger connections. The gate assignment software gets confused? My custom logic sorts it out based on aircraft size, ground equipment availability, and about a dozen other factors that the base system doesn't even track. I'd never documented these hooks. They were part of my personal methodology, built into my user profile on the system. And here's the beautiful part. When my access gets revoked, they all stop working. The system reverts to basic factory settings, like a smartphone after a hard reset. For the next 2 weeks, I played along. I showed up, did my job, smiled at Preston's daily visits to observe the transition. I even started training their new systems analyst, a kid named Justin, who thought operational complexity could be solved with better spreadsheets and color-coded dashboards. "So when the system shows a crew timeout," Justin asked, taking notes on his laptop, "we just reassign them automatically?" "Sure," I said, watching him type. "The algorithm will figure it out." What I didn't tell him was that my personal override checked for 37 different variables before making crew assignments. Things like individual pilot certifications, aircraft-specific training, requirements, union contractual obligations, medical restrictions, and the unwritten knowledge that Captain Martinez always needs 10 extra minutes for his pre-flight because he's thorough, not slow. The base system just saw warm bodies and empty seats. I watched Justin take notes, documenting procedures that would work perfectly until they didn't. He was a good kid, probably smart enough to figure it out eventually, but eventually might be too late when you're dealing with 200 flights a day and thousands of passengers who just want to get home safely. Friday afternoon, Preston called me into his office. The early retirement paperwork was spread across his mahogany desk like surrender documents. The numbers looked generous on paper, $200,000 to walk away, plus full pension benefits and 18 months of healthcare coverage. "Hank, we really appreciate everything you've done for Atlantic Regional," he said, sliding the papers across the desk. "But it's time to pass the torch to the next generation." I looked at the papers. The dollar amounts were insulting for 16 years of dedication, but they were also exactly what I needed to make this work. "One question," I said. "When do I lose system access?" "Monday morning. Clean break, fresh start for everyone. And you're confident the new system can handle operations without me?" Preston's smile was pure MBA arrogance. "Stephanie's team has been modeling our operations for weeks. The AI system is actually more efficient than the current manual processes." I signed the papers. All of them. Every page that said Hank Patterson was too old, too set in his ways, too much of a dinosaur to help Atlantic Regional soar into the digital future. But I kept the real documentation locked in my head. Monday morning, I didn't go to the office. I went to Murphy's Tavern, a pilot bar about 2 miles from the airport. It's the kind of place where the beer is cold, the lighting is dim, and the bartender, a guy named Woody, knows your drink before you sit down. "Early retirement, Hank?" Woody asked, sliding a bourbon across the bar. "Something like that," I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the admin app that connected to the dispatch system. My access was still active. It takes it about 4 hours to process termination paperwork. I watched the time. 8:30 a.m. Morning push starts. All the business travelers heading to their important meetings in important cities, trusting that someone competent was making sure their plane didn't fall out of the sky. 8:45 a.m. I logged out of the system. Permanently. The hooks died instantly. Every custom protocol, every override, every piece of personal logic that had been keeping Atlantic Regional running smoothly for 16 years, gone. The system reverted to factory default settings, like a computer after someone pulled the plug. I ordered another bourbon and opened FlightAware on my phone. Real-time tracking of every flight in the system. For the next hour, everything looked normal. The automated systems were handling the routine stuff fine. Then the storm hit. Not a weather storm. A complexity storm. Flight 892 to Chicago developed a hydraulic leak during taxi. Routine maintenance issue happens all the time. But instead of my override system automatically rebooking passengers on the next available flight while accounting for connections, destinations, and passenger priority status, the base system tried to assign them to a plane that was already overbooked. Then it cascaded. Gates got double assigned, crews timed out waiting for aircraft assignments, and the backup protocols that would normally sort everything out were suddenly nowhere to be found. My phone started buzzing. Danny's number. I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again. Then again. Then a text. "Hank, what the hell is happening? System is showing error codes I've never seen. Everything's turning red." I didn't reply. I ordered a burger and watched the disaster unfold in real time. By noon, Atlantic Regional had canceled 30% of their flights. By 2 p.m., the FAA issued a ground stop. Nothing moves until you can prove you know where your planes are supposed to be. For an airline, a ground stop is like cardiac arrest. You're not dead yet, but you're not exactly alive either. The news picked it up by 4 p.m. Technical difficulties plague Atlantic Regional Airways as passengers report widespread cancellations and delays. Woody turned up the TV volume. "Looks like your old company's having some problems." "Yeah," I said, raising my glass. "Looks like their digital transformation hit some turbulence." My phone rang. Preston's number. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again and again. Finally, I answered. "Hank, thank God. We need you back here. Something's wrong with the system." "Sorry to hear that," I said. "I'm retired, remember? This is serious. We've got planes stuck on the ground, passengers screaming, and the FAA threatening to pull our operating certificate. Sounds like a job for your AI system." Silence. Then, "The AI isn't working. Stephanie says it's a data integrity issue. Probably is. When you remove the human element from a complex system, integrity tends to suffer." "What do you want, Hank? Name your price." This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. But I'd already made my decision at Murphy's Tavern over that second bourbon. "I can't do that, Preston." "Why not?" "Because when you revoked my system access, you didn't just fire me. You performed surgery on your entire operation. All those protocols and overrides that kept things running, they were tied to my user profile. When I left, they left too. Can you fix it?" "Sure. Give me 6 months to rebuild everything from scratch. But here's the thing. I'll have to rebuild it in a way that's documented and transferable, which means it won't be nearly as efficient as what you had." I hung up and ordered another drink. By 6 p.m., the story was leading the evening news. Atlantic Regional had managed to strand over 5,000 passengers across 14 cities. Their stock price dropped 18% in after-hours trading. I got a call from Paul Griffin, CEO of Northeast Aviation, our biggest competitor. "Hank, I heard you're available." "I might be. We could use someone with your know-how. Consulting basis, name your terms. $250 an hour, minimum 40 hours a week. Done. When can you start?" I looked around Murphy's Tavern, at the old pilots nursing their drinks and shaking their heads at the news coverage. "How about tomorrow?" 8 months later, Northeast Aviation's on-time performance improved 15%, while Atlantic Regional was still rebuilding their operational systems with a team of consultants charging 3 times what I used to make. Preston Walsh left the company to pursue other opportunities. Stephanie Torres went back to consulting, probably telling some other company how AI was going to revolutionize their business. Me? I'm making more money than I ever did as an employee, working half the hours, and watching my former company learn the expensive way that experience isn't just something you can download and install. Gerald Walsh Sr. called me last month, said he wanted to apologize, said he should have backed me against his son, said the company would never recover its reputation. I told him he was probably right. But sometimes you have to tear down the old house before people appreciate the foundation that kept it standing. Here's what 16 years taught me that no MBA program ever will. Respect isn't something you can demand or automate. It's earned through competence, proven through results, and lost the moment you take it for granted. When experienced people finally walk away, they don't just take their knowledge, they take the invisible expertise that actually keeps the machine running.